Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Steven, and this is Northwest Small Batch Brewing. And I'm glad you're here. So, not too long ago, I did a video on how to make your first beer, like a 1-gallon batch of extract beer, being the easiest, most cost-effective way to start, trying out brewing, see how you like it. And then I had a thought that was, I should share my experience on what you should think about if you get hooked. If you try that 1-gallon extract beer or something similar, and you really like it, and you want to get more into brewing, what's the next step? Like, what kind of equipment should you look at getting, and that sort of thing. So before I get started, though, it would help me out a lot if you would take a look around my channel and see what kind of videos I have. I have quite a few videos. I break down brewing processes into different videos. I have full start to finish brew days. I have all kinds of stuff. So if you like what you see, it would seriously help my channel out a lot if you hit the like, thumbs up button on this video. And then while you're there, if you hit the subscribe button, it'll notify you every time I put out a new video. And that way, you never miss out. So, I haven't taken any notes or anything. I'm just sort of going on the cusp on this. But so, let's say you've got your 1-gallon fermenter now because you bought a kit or you piecemealed it together. However you did it, you've got enough equipment to do 1-gallon extract beer. So, you're getting into the hobby. You really like it. You have a couple of options here. The first thing you have to ask yourself is, do I have the capacity and space and interest in doing a larger amount of beer? 1 gallon of beer only makes about 7 to 10 bottles. And it takes, if you follow my process, it takes a month to ferment. And then it takes another couple of weeks to bottle it and let it carbonate. So you're talking about a month and a half from start to finish for your beer to be ready, and then you only get 7 to 10 bottles of beer. So I bring that up because a lot of people think that, oh, well, a gallon is manageable, and it is, right? You can do it on your stovetop. You can cool it in your sink just with tap water. It's much more manageable. Smaller space for the fermenter, all that kind of stuff. Definitely more manageable. However, you got to decide, like, is the effort and time worth only getting, like, such a small amount of beer out of it? It's fun to do, but I think you'll find, like most of us, that it's just you want to make a big enough batch so that it lasts you a little bit longer than just 7 to 10 beers. So, the reason I bring that up is because unless you're absolutely certain that you want to stick to 1-gallon smaller batches, I would recommend avoiding trying to buy more equipment and more fermenters that are meant for 1-gallon batches. It's not bad to have some of that stuff around. I keep mine around so that I can do experiments and things on a smaller scale before I maybe would try them on a larger scale. But otherwise, you want to kind of think ahead and go, well, maybe I should save the money I would buy on that 1-gallon fermenter and this or that, and instead put it towards what I need for doing 5-gallon batches, which is the next step up, really. Now, there are people that do sort of middle of that. They do like 2.5-gallon batches. The thing about that, though, is you still need, basically, you're going to still need a way to do 5 gallons, because what they do is they take a 5-gallon system and they only make like 2.5 gallons, right? So, you still want to look at that, 1 gallon or 5 gallons system. So let's talk about why it is such a huge jump to go from making 1-gallon batches to 5. The first big issue is you're probably going to want to definitely switch. Well, let's start with the water. You're going from needing, really, if you're doing 1-gallon batches and it's extract, you don't need to sparge or anything. You're basically going to use 1 gallon of water, and that's all you need. 1 gallon of water. easy peasy. Just, and you can buy your water at the supermarket. Just get a gallon of spring water and you're all set. 5-gallon batches. So you actually want to end with 5.5 gallons. That's usually your goal. So that way you have a half gallon of leeway where all the trub, right, the yeast and everything else is going to collect on the bottom of the fermenter. And so you're going to lose about a half gallon. And then you'll end up with 5 gallons of usable beer. So 5.5 gallon batch means that you're going to need around 7.5 gallons of water to start with. I can tell you right now, most likely you're going to find that your stove is not capable of boiling 7.5 gallons of liquid. People don't necessarily think about that. But, and also the size of the pot is enormous, right? It's very difficult to get a pot that's going to hold that much water that will fit on the stove, let alone try to get it to heat up and actually boil. So what are your options for that? So that's the first thing you have to think of is, well, what can I get? What do I need to be able to boil that much water? Well, there's really 3 different ways to do it that I know of that are the most common. There's the old way. And when I say old, I don't mean it's bad. I don't mean that there's anything wrong with it. It works fine. People still do it today. It's just not what most people getting into brewing today would jump to, because it's all homemade sort of stuff, and it takes up a lot of space, and it's got to be done outdoors. Of course, I'm talking about the 3-tier propane system, where you have 3. A lot of times you'll see people build or buy these 3-tiered racks, where you have basically a pot that sits on a giant propane burner. And the propane burner is, of course, what's used to boil that much water. And then you use a giant cooler. Some people have the square ones. Some people have the big igloo round ones. However you do it, a lot of people will use that to mash, and then the cooler does a pretty good job of keeping your mash at the temperature you want for a full hour. And then you have to sparge, and it's a whole different sparging process with the 3-tier system. So it's a lot of equipment. It has to be done outdoors. But, I mean, there are benefits like, if you're outdoors and you have a hose, it's easier to clean up afterwards and that sort of thing. And it does heat up faster. Propane is definitely going to heat up your water a lot faster. But it's just not the way most people are going these days. So there's 2 other methods I can think of. Both of them are electric, all right? And they're basically the same. It's just the systems themselves are a little different. I kind of put them in 2 categories. You've got the all-in-one electric systems, and then you have the modular electric systems. I have both. I just upgraded to a modular system. So the all-in-ones are basically like the old-style coffee urns that are kind of narrow and tall. You've got like the Grain Father, the Anvil Foundry, the Mash and Boil, what is it called? The Fermentosaurus? No, that's a fermenter. I can't think. Brazilla. Sorry, Brazilla. So there's a bunch of them like that. And there's even some that you've never heard of that are just like off-brands that are trying to get in and make their dime while they can on people. So those are systems that are all enclosed, meaning that for the most part, those systems, you can't switch out parts. Whatever element you have, that's what you have. Whatever pump is in the system, that's what you have. They have these sparge arms that come up and over that are kind of permanently attached that pump the water, all that kind of stuff, right? And they have their issues. I'm not going to go into all the details of the pros and cons. I'm just saying that's one version that you can get. And then the other version of a brewing system that you can get is a modular system, meaning that it's more of a pot. Instead of a big kettle like a coffee kettle, it's more like a big pot. And the element goes in the side of the pot, but it can be removed and replaced or upgraded. The pump is separate. It uses hoses that attach with quick disconnects usually and that sort of thing. But the pump is separate. You can upgrade your pump or replace the pump. Everything is removable, replaceable, blah, blah, blah. All right. Most of these systems have special elements that are low density that will help keep your wort from scorching. They will be able to heat up and boil. It does take longer, though. It can take a few hours to heat your water up to the temperature you want and whatnot. So that adds a lot to your brew day. There's a lot of waiting because you're just waiting for the water to get to the temperature you want with those systems. So time-wise, it does take longer, but it's just so convenient to have it all in one system. They're easier to clean. You can do it indoors, all that kind of stuff. So that's the first thing you have to think about. If you're going to move to a 5-gallon batches, you have to decide what system you're going to use to do it, because you're not going to be able to do it on the stove. So there's a big jump. That's why I say a big jump from 1 gallon to 5 gallons. So that's the first thing to look at. Secondly is cost. So it's more expensive to do extract brewing because you're basically paying somebody to do a bunch of the work for you. You're paying somebody to mill the grain and steep it, and get all the sugar and flavor out, and then boil it down into a syrup and give it to you. So you're paying someone to do that, which means you're paying extra money for someone to do a service. Well, if you're going to do 5 gallons of beer, it can get expensive pretty quickly if you're just using extract. So it's one reason why a lot of people do all grain. You do it yourself, right? You just buy the grain and you mill it up and do it yourself. Now, you don't have to buy a mill. You can mill your grain at a homebrew store. And a cool little tip is if you mill your grain at the homebrew store and you feel like it's too coarse, that you need a finer mill, put it through the mill a second time. So mill it twice while you're at the homebrew store, and it will give you a little bit more of a finer crush that way. So I guess equipment-wise, some of the stuff you can still use, but you're going to need a fermenter that can handle 5 gallons of beer. There's a bazillion fermenters out there, especially in the 5-gallon range, that'll hold that kind of amount of beer. In fact, you don't want a 5-gallon fermenter. You actually want something more like a 7-gallon fermenter, so that it has head space, so that when it starts fermenting, it doesn't explode and go out the top and blow out. But there's tons of those. You can get everything from plastic PET fermenters that are sort of like the old school ones. You can get some that have wide mouth that make it easier to get in and out and clean. You can get stainless steel. There's so many options. But if you're just starting out, really the plastic PET one is going to be the best price-wise. None of them are better than any others, except some of them have features. Like I have one that I love right now that does pressure fermenting. But unless you're kegging your beer, it's not really a necessary thing. Why spend the money on that? I have a couple of stainless steel fermenters that I love. But I would say the biggest thing for me, if I was looking at a fermenter and trying to decide what I wanted to get for ease, I would look for something that has a spigot. That's my biggest piece of advice, is find ways to not have to use a siphon. The auto siphon, it works, but it's a pain to clean. The tubing goes everywhere. It's just, trust me, if you can avoid having to siphon, it's a world of difference in it'll just make you so much happier. So spigots, and you can connect a little hose to the spigot if you need to. It works really well. So fermenter, the whole brewing system. You're already going to have a hydrometer, hopefully, so you can still use that the same as you did with your 1-gallon system. What are you going to do with the beer when it's done? I guess that's the third question. You can bottle it just like you did your 1 gallons, but if you're going to bottle it, now you're talking about 48 to 50 bottles of beer is what that makes. That's a lot of bottles. That's like 2 giant 24-case boxes of bottles. Of course, if you have those bottles left over from just drinking commercial beer, you can use those. You can buy bottles relatively inexpensive. I think you can get a whole case for like around $20 or so, give or take, in bottle caps. But you're going to have to go through the whole process of putting in the priming sugar and then filling every bottle individually and capping it and then waiting 2 weeks for it to carbonate. Most people who do 5-gallon batches, maybe they do a couple batches where they do bottles or they do bottling for a while, and then they get so tired of doing it that they invest in a kegging system. So that's another thing to think about. If I could do it all over again, I would skip the bottles altogether and just save up and go with kegging. You can still put a few, I still do this today after I've got it on the keg. I will still, like if I want to give a friend a few bottles, I just bottle right off the keg, and it works fine. And you have guaranteed amount of carbonation that way and everything. And so it doesn't mean you can't bottle the beer after it's in the keg. It just, you know, generally speaking, if you're just drinking it at home or whatever, it's just so much easier to pull it off the keg. And as far as the CO2 goes, if I fill my CO2 tank, and I have like a 5-pound CO2 tank, so it's pretty small. And I usually make 1 beer a month. And that CO2 tank will last me a good 6 months or even longer than 6 months. And it only costs like $20 to fill the tank with CO2 at your local homebrew store. So it's not expensive. It's definitely less expensive than having to replace bottles that people don't bring back to you, like if you give bottles out. So those are the main considerations. Basically what I'm saying is, if you're thinking about moving from a 1-gallon to a 5-gallon system, it's a big leap because you need equipment that can handle that kind of liquid, that can heat that amount of liquid, that can ferment that kind of liquid, and then how you're going to serve it and store it, right? So it's a big leap, but I would suggest saving up and trying to get the bare minimum you need for doing 5-gallon batches instead of sticking with the 1-gallon. Because if you really like homebrewing, 1-gallon batches aren't going to do it for you, you know. And then you're going to end up trying to do like 5-gallon batches all in little 1-gallon jugs, you know, instead of, I mean, you could do that, but that seems like a hassle too, because then you got 5 little jugs and you have to do 5 different fermenters, you know, right? And you still have to have a way to heat up 5 gallons of wort. You're not going to do 5 separate, I'm assuming you're not going to do it 5 separate times. But anyway, that's pretty much all I wanted to say, is to say if you're thinking about, if you like the hobby and you're thinking about moving on to 5-gallon batches, or whether you want to stick with 1-gallon batches, my recommendation, don't invest heavily in 1-gallon batches, because you're pretty quickly going to want to move to a 5 gallons. Instead, save that money and save up and budget for the main pieces of equipment you need to be able to do 5-gallon batches. So if you have any questions about that, put them in the comments and I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate you putting up with this long explanation of how to move to a 5-gallon process. And I hope you have a great day. I hope you have a great beer. And as always, keep on homebrewing.